When we go back and look at the series of events that led up to the catastrophic loss of the Fitzgerald, we know the radar was inoperative. We know that he had the fence rail down and the ballast tank vents were down, that kind of stuff. But I think right at the end, what we have to account for is the list that the boat had. Captain McSorley said he had a list right from Caribou Island on, and that became a severe list rather quickly. So the boat's heeled over to one side pretty good. And then we have to go, I think, with the photographs, the underwater photographs that the Coast Guard took of the wreck itself. And to me, the two really important views, one is that shows that the two hatch covers that are right behind the pilot house, number 1 and number 2, those hatch covers are not in place, but the covers themselves are inside, sitting on top of the cargo, folded into a V shape. And then the other thing I think is really important that really shows in the photos and is kind of overlooked in the general public's view of the wreck is when it broke in two. Yes, it's in two sections, the forward section right side up, the after end upside down, but that middle section is always described as being really confused, just a massive debris, and it's really not. It just broke in a little different way. And if we think about the middle section of the boat, a real short middle 1/3 of the boat, it's kind of like a sandwich. And the top slice of bread stayed with the forward end of the boat. The bottom slice stayed with the after end of the boat. So it's not broken like you'd snap a pencil. It's more like a green stick where you bend it, you bend it, you bend it, and finally it snaps and then it tears a little and then you have to twist off that last little bit to separate the parts. And that's exactly what happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald. And when you look at that middle section kind of breaking up different than the rest, that brings in questions, well, why would it do that? And I think in bringing that to the fore, we start to get into what Red Bergner referred to as the loose keel. That's probably kind of an unfortunate term, but what he was talking about was the outer skin of the ship was not well welded to the inside, to the keels and the keelsons, all those sister keels inside. And every few years, the boat had to be re-welded from the inside, welding the outer skin to the keel. And it was just like the boat was kind of squirming around in skin that was just a little too big for it. And it loosened up in the middle and it had to be re-welded. And it could have been something from the construction, could have been something in the actual fabrication, it could have been in the design, the kind of steel, it could have been in the loading process. Because the traditional loading for the Fitzgerald, there wasn't really a loading plan, it was whatever the mates worked out to get the maximum cargo. And what I was told at Burlington Northern, the way they loaded over there was with the gravity chutes, is you'd drop a load in the middle of the boat, then you'd drop a load in the after end, then you'd straighten it out in front, then you'd have another run. Load it in the middle so it would sag down, then bring the aft down, then bring the forward down to straighten it out a little and let her set on her tail a little bit. So it was a constant flexing up and down, kind of the hogging, sagging thing constantly. And then when you add into that, in the later years, the last few years it was running after they'd raised the load line the last time, is when you really start to hear about what Richard Orgel called the wiggling thing. And that too is kind of part of that loose keel concept, that it has to do with the middle of the boat being kind of squirrely. And that the boat would shift to the left or right or up or down, and it could get to a point in some wave conditions where it would hit a harmonic and just kind of vibrate, and it just wouldn't come back. And all you could do was change directions or slow down the boat. You probably couldn't speed it up anymore. But that was about all you could do to counteract it. And it was a standing order on the boat that if it started to happen, you got the captain, you made a decision, and tried to get that to either go away completely or at least reduce the impact. And when you think about those things, then one other item that's quite often referred to by the ship engineer, not a design engineer, but the guy who's kind of down in the back in the basement running the engine, that engineer. On a lot of boats, he can go right up on deck and stand in a spot and say, this is where the hinge is. And you kind of wonder, well, what hinge? There's no hinge here. What he's talking about is that kind of flexion point, where if you kind of think about standing at the after end of the boat and looking forward and watching that boat squirm and twist and flex up and down and whatnot, there's a point where it seems to kind of concentrate. And that's right at about 2/3, 3/4 of the way back to the after cabins is about where that stress all concentrates. And that's where you'll find the hinge. And it's right about in that area where the Edmund Fitzgerald broke. So I think the combination of things there in the design, the hatch cover failure, not like the Coast Guard thought, but failure from too much weight, too much water on it. The collapse of the hatch covers, and we have those enormous openings when we have the two hatch covers gone, with tons of water to pour in. And the boat's still going forward, it's now going down. The forward end's trying to raise the back up, and that's when it cracks. And when it cracks, it splits, not right straight down, but across the deck, partway down the sides. And then it rips forward, kind of on the middle of the sides, and then finally through the bottom, and you get that green stick look. And then the after end, that's kind of dragging like a half-empty bucket back there, and gets that little half twist, just enough to get it to roll over and end up upside down. And what you had was the middle bottom stayed with the after end. The forward took the top part of the deck, the upper part of that sandwich. And when the bottom twisted off, it peeled the outer skin right off that middle section. And that's the section that always had that loose keel. So I think it's all there in the photos. And it's, I think, a reasonable explanation of what's visible on the bottom and what the things that we know about the wreck to explain it that way. And I haven't found any other way to really explain the boat being in one piece on the surface and ending up upside down with the after end, forward section right side up, and the middle broken like it is, unless we go through that kind of green stick process, which really got going with the list, the collapsed hatch covers, and then the hinge coming into play because of the way the boat was loaded, not having a loading plan, and then years and years of just plain flexing and use. And whether there were any design things or material defects is beyond me, but you can always add those kinds of things into it to really make it happen.